On today's show, we'll be looking at the hot button topic that has unexpectedly come out to the forefront of today's political debates, critical race theory.
Critical race theory is the denial of critical thinking.
Critical race theory is a device designed to capture white guilt.
It is about working to change and overthrow infrastructure.
An ideology that threatens to overturn the advances of human civilization over the last 500 years.
This type of coverage has set off many parents around the country, and you can only imagine what kind of parents those are.
Just because I do not want critical race theory taught to my children in school does not mean that I'm a racist, damn it!
The backlash against CRT is widespread. In April of 2021, Idaho became the first state in the United States to enact laws against critical race theory in public education. Shortly after, Oklahoma, Tennessee, Iowa, and Texas followed suit, and over 20 states have considered similar bills in their legislature. Even in states like California, where CRT is prescribed part of the curriculum, teachers are getting defamed and fired over this. We check in with Shieh, who spent 5 years teaching about systemic justice in LA, to get an on-the-ground perspective.
I think what's important to note is like the critical race, like CRT is a later conversation. The frontier end of ethnic studies, they were already thinking about that automatically because it's one of the first things you learn about. So it's not like we were talking about it explicitly. It really wasn't until conservatives started talking about it that we're like, oh my God, what is it? Like, and do you actually use it in the classroom? And it's like, well, the people who were like doing ethnic studies weren't talking about it because we were just doing it. I've been called a devil worshiper. I have been told that I turn kids gay multiple times. I mean, I've been at 4 schools in 5 years, and I literally can't teach in the second largest district in the United States. I always feel like I have failed.
To help us envision how teachers might approach these hot waters, we go to our correspondent, Raquel Maldonado Rivero.
Many teachers argue, what other choice do they have but to violate these laws and guidelines? After all, what would American history look like if K-12 history teachers didn't teach kids about racism and white supremacy? And welcome, kids. Today, we're going to be talking about the foundation of the United States. In 1607, Englishmen almost starved to death while traveling to North America. But why did they come here? Well, I think I might get fired if I show you guys the Jamestown Charter and the racist descriptions of indigenous people who were already here with their own established government and religion and society. So let's actually just move on. We get to 1619, and some more people arrived. They weren't quite indentured servants, and they weren't free. What was the difference, you guys ask? Well, I'd show you the laws that explain what was happening, but y'all might start to believe that racist ideologies and views were baked into the foundation of the United States. So I'm just gonna move it along here. Those who don't understand how systemic racism operates in America might surmise that certain people are just lazier, dumber, and more violent than others to rationalize the disparities and inequalities that exist. Critical race theory challenges this narrative. Unfortunately, this challenge is frequently being perceived as a threat. People are inclined to believe in the systems that surround them, which is why they rationalize them by dispositionalizing those negatively impacted by systemic racism. In other words, when systems go unchallenged, it's natural for people to legitimize the harms they cause and instead see alternative explanations as a threat to their core foundational stories. To help us learn more about system legitimization, please welcome a good friend of the Tort Report show for today's segment of Who knew?
We Americans at this moment in our history have a very strong craving to believe that our system is just. And that desire to believe that, particularly when the system is threatened, is going to influence how we interpret our world. It's going to influence what theories and what schemas we find attractive and that we find credible.
And that concludes our portion on Who knew? We now turn to the tort portion of the episode, where we try to apply tort law to today's hot button topic and see what sticks. To elaborate on this, we'll go to our torts correspondent, Tom Zick.
To see what tort law can do for teachers bearing the brunt of the backlash from inflammatory coverage on critical race theory, I checked in with Cordelia Kenny, a distinguished scholar in defamation law. She told me that she thinks defamation law could be used as a tool to fight back against the false and malicious rhetoric that makes teachers' lives so much harder. Folks in the CRT movement might be able to sue media outlets that have gone after them as long as there's a false statement, it was made with knowledge of falsity, it was of and concerning a particular group of people, and this might be a bit of a problem because a lot of the attacks are personal. Finally, there have been damages to reputation. The scope of defamation in tort law has traditionally been really narrow. There's a fear that expanding the implications of any one defamation case would have a chilling effect on speech. This may no longer be an accurate portrayal of the media, though. But in order to really understand how tort law got here, it's time for a classic tort.
Today's classic tort is the New York Times Company versus Sullivan. The facts of the case are as follows. A full-page ad in the New York Times urged readers to heed the rising voices of Black civil rights activists. The ad in the New York Times admonished police violence in Montgomery and Alabama and made several statements about the brutality and arrest that civil rights activists, like Dr. King, were facing. The Commissioner of Police of Montgomery sued the New York Times for libel, and the Supreme Court ruled that the public office plaintiff, in this case Commissioner Sullivan, had to prove actual malice of the defendant in order to succeed in a libel tort case. But the context here is important. This was at a time where the civil rights movement was building power across the country and changing the narrative on race and power. This obviously impacted dispositional narratives about civil rights activists and the police. So we have to appreciate how Black activists successfully changed the dominant story shaping tort law at this time to the point where the court actually ruled against a police commissioner. And in a moment of increased awareness about racial injustice and fake news, there's a good argument to be made that media outlets slamming critical race theory are intentionally peddling falsehoods with actual malice that harms teachers. One thing is clear. Defending CRT teachers against life-altering false accusations and demonization is essential. And defamation tort law provides an interesting window of opportunity to build awareness and momentum for change. That concludes today's segment of the Tort Report.